My name's Jayne Park, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit group called Impact Silver Spring. As the executive director, I just sort of oversee the entire organization. So we're a grassroots organization. We work in different neighborhoods throughout Montgomery County, mostly in Silver Spring. We work in very diverse neighborhoods, racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically. And our goal is to try to strengthen communities across lines of racial, socioeconomic, and ethnic difference. So my parents are from Korea, and my dad emigrated to the United States in the 1950s during the Korean War. So he came first, and then my mother followed after him. I think she arrived late 1950s, early 1960s. Yeah, so my parents were the first to immigrate to the United States from Korea, and then I was born here. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and then we moved to Rhode Island when I was in elementary school. And so Rhode Island was a very white community, very few racial ethnic minorities. And so I grew up always as, my brother and I were always the only Asian kids in the entire school. So that's sort of the context I grew up in. It was a very white, homogeneous community. Okay. And so I think, you know, a personal challenge for me growing up was having Korean parents who were very traditional. So at home, they always reminded me that I was Korean. And then Korean culture is so different from American Western culture. So just growing up having to straddle both. Yeah, I mean, even though they've lived here a long time, they actually moved back to Korea for about 10 years when I was in college. But growing up, you know, even though they had lived in America a long time, they were still very much traditional in their views and their values. So, so I always grew up in a having to negotiate the vast differences between Western American culture and Korean culture. Well, so I would have to say, growing up in a white, all-white community, I probably spent more time rebelling against my Korean tradition, because you know, you spend most of your time in school, and the peer pressure to conform was very strong. So I think growing up, I probably wanted to be more white. Okay. And spent a lot of time just rebelling against the Korean traditions. Oh, we fought a lot, yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. And then my dad was a minister on top of that, so I also went through a period of questioning whether I was even Christian. So I gave them a lot of gray hairs. So I moved to, okay, so then I grew up in Rhode Island, went to college there, and then went to law school in Boston. But after law school, I kind of hit a point in my life. I think it finally started catching up to me, so the whole identity issue. And so I went to Korea after law school just to kind of, I mean, at that point I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. Right, so because I sort of gave into family pressure to do something practical. Okay. So I went to law school as a way to kind of appease my parents, but I hated it. Didn't want to be a lawyer, and just sort of realized that this whole endeavor of trying to run away from your ethnic roots, like, it just caught up to me. So I just decided to go to Korea. So I left and I lived in Korea for a year. And that was a huge turning point for me in terms of really understanding more my family history, my identity as a Korean American. And so after I came back from Korea, I moved to the DC area, and at that point dedicated myself to working on Asian American issues. So I'd like to start by just sort of reminding people of the context in which we're living in. um, you know, in diverse communities, there's lots of division because it's really hard, I think, to get people from different racial, ethnic, and class backgrounds to mix and to form connections and relationships. So we've got barriers because of different race, ethnicity, and languages. We have barriers that divide us because of socioeconomic class. We have the barriers that just exist in America, I think, because America is very much about self-interest and individualism. And so all those forces combined create a culture and where people are kind of fragmented and isolated, where fear and mistrust are more dominant. And so our core mission is to break through as many of those barriers and divisions as possible, to get people to connect across lines of difference as human beings first, to build relationships, form connections, and to find things, shared purpose of things they can act on together. And so we support lots of different community-led actions in the different neighborhoods where we work. And these are typically among sort of low-income people of color. And so we take a very much an empowerment approach. So we believe that no matter who you are, you have something important to contribute. And we just try to help people activate their power to be change agents. I'm sort of responsible for the whole thing. So I just make sure that the staff, so we have about 10 staff here, so just supporting staff to do their best. We're not a traditional hierarchical organization, so we have a very different operating culture. So I try to create a culture here of shared leadership. So even though my title is executive director, I'm very committed to a different style of leading than the traditional forms of leading. So I'm into like making sure that everybody can share power and decision making. So I guess I'm ultimately responsible for creating a certain culture here that enables people to bring their best selves forward and to contribute to our shared collective mission. So one of the things that's emerged from our work is a group of mostly Latino immigrants, you know, had dreams of starting their own micro business. So a lot of people in the community have skills in landscaping, painting, sewing, cooking. And, you know, a lot of them just sort of had dreams of opening their own business, sort of at the micro business level. But one of the biggest barriers for a lot of communities of color is accessing capital to start their business because they don't have credit history, they don't have assets, so banks just don't give loans to a lot of folks in the low-income community. So, so a group of community members decided to just come together and start their own shared loan fund. And so they started last year. And so this is the kind of work that we support. We ask community members to name what their goals and aspirations are, and then we support them in achieving that goal. So a small group of about 6 immigrant micro-entrepreneurs came together last year. In response to not being able to access capital, they said, well, let's just start our own shared loan fund. And so every week they would just start contributing whatever money they could to this shared pot. And in a year's time, they've grown from a small circle of 6 people to now a cooperative of 40 members, and they've raised about $70,000 for their shared loan fund. And out of that, they've been able to give out 11 loans to their members, ranging in amount from $150 to $11,000. That's helped some of the micro entrepreneurs with some of their business capital needs. And they've structured themselves as a cooperative, which is a different kind of economic model that's sort of based on shared ownership. So it's sort of a cutting-edge economic grassroots model that we've helped them to develop. And so they're now starting to get a lot of attention from the county as sort of a...
That was successful then?
Yeah, so it's still in the development phase, but I think that they really created something creative and innovative. And so I think that's probably one of our most proud accomplishments. In terms of ethnic groups and socioeconomic status, when you look at the data, Asian Americans are doing exceptionally well, along with whites, whereas blacks and Latinos are falling way behind. So there's a huge challenge of the achievement gap. But when issues come up, like the county wanting to figure out ways to make magnet programs more diverse so that more blacks and Latinos can participate, you get groups of Asian parents who protest, right, saying, oh no, that's not fair, it should be based on merit. And if you do that, that means my kid won't get in. And it's the same with affirmative action. It's the same argument that all these policies to benefit other communities of color are going to harm me. That I find extremely frustrating. And again, and I think it goes to Asians coming here not understanding the history of this country, the history of racism, the history of anti-black racism, and also the history of racism against Asians, right? And sometimes Asians think of themselves like their whole goal is to assimilate into white America. But I think that really comes at a cost for us as a collective society, and that we need to start thinking more universally about the collective good. And if giving up a few seats for Asian students in the magnet program means that more blacks and Latinos can have a seat and an opportunity that's been denied them, then we should be willing to do that. And so it just bothers me when I hear these Asian parents. It's like the one time they get politically involved is to protest, you know, the magnet program becoming more inclusive. So I think Asians need to struggle with this whole idea of privilege. Definitely try to make as much effort as possible to build relationships with people in different communities. Take the time to understand the history of race and racism in this country, and to just and just be true to who you are too, because I feel like still with the younger generation there's a lot of parental pressure to be people that we're not and to follow a certain path, and I think that's very destructive, and to just be true to who you are.